It was the 4th of July, and I was a ghost in the middle of Main Street. The folding chair beneath me creaked every time I shifted, metal legs digging into the heat-softened asphalt. Behind me, the old hardware store stood shuttered like it had for years, one broken window boarded over with a warped plank of cedar. I'd borrowed the chair from my neighbor's boy, Ryan. He didn't ask why I wanted it, just handed it over like it was nothing. The town was busy celebrating its freedom. Families pressed along the sidewalks, flags in every child's hand, a brass band warming up near the courthouse steps, horns echoing faint through the morning haze. I'd positioned myself away from it all, down near the auto parts store that hadn't sold a fan belt since '97. I didn't mind. I preferred the quiet. Always had. My navy cap was older than most of the parents walking past. Sun-bleached, sweat-stained, threadbare at the brim. I could feel the stares. Not direct, not curious. Just people glancing and looking away. Like I was a roadside mark, or maybe a mistake. I rolled up my sleeve, just to breathe a little easier. That's when the tattoo showed. Faded ink on sagging skin. The trident and eagle's claw. Most folks wouldn't know what it meant. I didn't blame them. I never explained it. I was just another old man in a folding chair. Until he walked by. Tall, dark sunglasses. A gait that said military even if he didn't wear the uniform. He slowed when he saw the tattoo. Didn't say a thing at first. Just stood there. Then he leaned down, close enough I could hear him over the clatter of parade prep, and whispered one word. Brother. He stood taller than I expected. The kind of man who looked like he belonged on a recruitment poster, but without the polish. His boots were scuffed. The creases at his eyes weren't just from squinting in sunlight. They were from squinting through a rifle scope, or maybe blinking grit away during a dust-off somewhere too far from home. He hadn't said anything else, not at first. Just that one word. Brother. It hung there in the morning heat, heavier than any salute. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because something inside me just paused. My chest tightened, like my ribs didn't know what to do with the breath sitting behind them. My jaw worked once, then again, and still I said nothing. The parade hadn't reached our end of town yet, but you could feel it coming. Flags bobbing in the distance, the rhythm of snare drums skipping over the pavement like a heartbeat that had learned to march. I wasn't here for the parade. I never was. But this year, I couldn't risk missing it. It was my last. The cancer was in my bones now, and I'd made peace with that. No treatments, no hospitals, just time, in whatever quiet way I could find it. That's why I'd asked Ryan to drive me into town early, before the crowds, before the noise, before the sun got too hot. He didn't ask why. He just helped me into his rusted-out pickup, folded the chair into the bed, and nodded like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Nothing about this day was. And now, this man, this stranger, was standing in front of me, a statue carved from memory and recognition. He crouched a little then, close enough to meet my eyes. The street around us blurred. I could feel the gazes starting to turn. Families shifting. Kids tugging at sleeves. The kind of moment that starts quiet, then begins to ripple outward like a dropped stone in a still pond. You're Walter Cain, he said. It wasn't a question. You carried my grandfather out of a ravine near Incheon. 1951. He talked about it every year until he died. Kept a photo of your unit under his socks. Said if he ever found you again, he'd thank you. Said he owed you everything. I stared at him. My tongue felt dry as sandpaper. I wasn't used to being seen, but I remembered the name. Elias Burke. Lieutenant Elias Burke. Back then, he'd been a corporal with a busted leg and a stomach wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I'd hauled him out under mortar fire, one arm around his shoulders, the other pressed into his side to keep him from bleeding out. We lost 2 men that night. Saved 1. I never forgot the ones we didn't save. The ones you save carry your silence. The ones you lose carry your voice. I nodded. He made it. The man smiled, not with his mouth but with something in his eyes. He made it. Married, 3 kids, 9 grandkids. Ran a plumbing business until he died in 2003. Said his life was borrowed. Yours. I looked down at my hands. The spots on the skin had deepened over the years. My fingers shook more than they used to. That night in the ravine, I'd been 20 years old. Just a corpseman with too much blood on his uniform and too many names in his notebook. I'd worn gloves for the first 6 months. After that, we didn't bother. Gloves made it harder to tell the living from the dead. You look like him, I said quiet. The man nodded. I get that a lot. He stood then, turned, and raised his hand. A single, deliberate gesture, sharp, clean, unmistakable. And the parade stopped. Not with a screech or a shout, but with the hush of recognition. A ripple through the crowd. The brass band slowed to silence. The ROTC students at the front, barely out of high school, lowered their flags in confusion. People turned toward us, shielding their eyes from the morning sun. The man stepped into the center of the street and turned back to me. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. This man, corpseman Walter Cain, saved my grandfather's life 74 years ago. We've been looking for him for decades. He served in silence, and he came home without recognition. But we remember. We always remember. The silence deepened. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. Then something shifted. A man in army dress green stepped forward from the sidewalk. Older, maybe late 60s. He squared his shoulders, raised his right hand to his brow, and saluted. "Welcome home, corpsman," he said. Another followed, an Air Force veteran in a wheelchair who raised his hand, fingers trembling. "Welcome home." Then a Marine in full uniform. Then another. And another. Some had medals on their chests. Some wore simple t-shirts with faded logos from long-closed bases. One by one, they stepped forward, forming a quiet, solemn line. Each one stood before me, met my eyes, and offered the same words. "Welcome home, corpsman." Some whispered it. Some said it with tears running down their cheeks. A few dropped to one knee. I sat still, barely breathing, my hands locked around the old black and white photo I'd brought. The one with the unit lined up in front of sandbags, arms slung over each other's shoulders. Most of them were gone now. But they were here too, in the silence. In the weight of it. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel it, but because something deeper was moving inside me. It wasn't pride. It wasn't glory. It was the simple relief of being remembered. The man in sunglasses stepped forward one last time, placed his hand on my shoulder, and said quietly, "You're not forgotten. Not today. Not ever." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The sounds came back before the pictures. That's always how it is. First the scream of artillery, then the wet thud of mortar rounds sinking into the mountainside. Then the shouts, scattered, confused, half drowned by the whine of incoming shells. The night was black as pitch. Even the moon had ducked low behind the peaks. I was 19, maybe 20. I can't remember now. But I remember what it felt like to carry 3 wounded men through mud so slick it ate your boots off your feet. We were outside a village near Incheon. The cold had settled deep by then, into our bones, into the guns, into the cracks behind our teeth. Our unit had moved through a pass that wasn't marked on the maps. Ambush came fast, screaming from the ridge. Mortars hit first, then small arms. Half the squad scattered. 3 went down. I remember someone yelling my name, but I didn't stop. There was blood in my mouth and someone else's dog tag in my pocket. The first Marine was already gone when I reached him. Eyes open, face blown sideways. The second was still breathing but his leg was gone below the knee. I slid my arms under him, lifted him like a sack of grain, and dragged him into the rocks. That's when I saw the third one, face down, twitching. He'd been hit in the back and the thigh. Blood soaked through his trousers so fast it shined in the dark. I crawled to him, pressed my palm to the worst wound. "Stay with me," I said, over and over. "You stay with me." That was Elias Burke's grandfather. He was just a kid then, like the rest of us. Wide eyes and wild breath. He kept trying to push himself up, but his elbow wouldn't hold. "You're hit bad," I told him. "You don't move." He tried to argue. Always the tough ones do. But then another shell hit nearby, close enough to lift both of us into the air. I don't remember landing. I just remember the heat and the ringing. I wrapped a pressure bandage around his side while my ears bled. Used my belt to tie off the thigh. His breathing slowed. I thought I was losing him. I told him something I can't recall now. Something about home. About it being close. It was a lie. But lies are tools when you're trying to keep a man breathing. The officer in charge of our evac had called us off the comms. "Too hot," he'd said. "No recovery." I didn't listen. I carried the second Marine first, piggyback over the rocks, through a wash filled with smoke and dust and frozen blood. Dumped him near a collapsed trench line where a few of our guys were regrouping. Then I went back. I always went back. Burke's grandfather was unconscious when I got to him again. Skin cold, but still breathing. I hoisted him over my shoulders and started the climb. That ridge was death. Narrow, steep, lined with the kind of silence that only follows shellfire. My boots slipped twice. Once, I nearly dropped him, but I didn't. My hands were raw from the rock. My knees buckled. My back screamed. When we reached the trench line, someone grabbed him from me. "You're insane," one of the guys said. Maybe I was. I collapsed next to the others, lungs burning. My mouth tasted of gunpowder and bile. A corpsman's job isn't to die for men. It's to keep them from dying. That night, I came closer to death than I ever had. But it wasn't mine I was thinking about. It was theirs. A week later, I got word from a field doctor. Burke made it. I didn't answer. I never visited him after that. I didn't write. I didn't follow up. We were always moving. Always leaving. There was always another wound. Back in the States, someone tried to pin a medal on me for that night. Silver Star, they said. I said no. Told them to give it to the man who died in my place. I'd shipped out under another name. Cain was common enough. It helped me disappear. That was the point. I came home through the side door of a country that didn't want to remember what it had asked us to do. I didn't want anyone waiting with signs or flags. I didn't want a parade. I just wanted silence. And that's what I got. For 60 years, no one spoke of that night. No one knew. Not even Ryan's father, my neighbor, who used to mow my lawn when I was too sore to stand. He'd ask what the tattoo meant. I always said, old thing, doesn't matter anymore. But it did matter, because here, now, standing in the middle of Pine Hollow's main street, a man who wasn't even born when I served had just called me brother. Because his grandfather had lived. Because sometimes silence isn't enough. Sometimes it takes 74 years and a whispered word for the ghosts to come home. They say small towns remember everything. Truth is, they don't. They remember who used to own the diner, who taught shop class in '82, who drinks too much, who doesn't mow their lawn. But they don't remember the quiet ones. The ones who carry things without showing them. The ones who walk home after church and don't say much. People like me. Until someone else remembers for them. After the man, Elias Burke, stood in that street and told my story, something shifted. I could feel it before I could understand it. The parade didn't start back up right away. It just stopped. Not in confusion anymore, but reverence. Like the whole day had been waiting for something real to anchor. Then people began to move. Slow at first. Unsure. A woman in a red sundress and sandals stepped off the curb. She was maybe in her 40s. One of the school teachers, I think. She came forward and set a hand on my shoulder. Thank you, she said, and her voice trembled. Behind her came an older man with a Vietnam hat, white beard, and a limp that looked familiar. He didn't speak at all. Just saluted. Sharp, precise. Then a teenage boy. Then a mail carrier. Then the mayor, of all people. Within minutes, I was surrounded. Ryan had parked down the block, but I saw him running toward us now, eyes wide, camera hanging useless around his neck. He got there just as Burke stepped aside and let the people form a line. I didn't know what to say. I never had much use for crowds. But this wasn't noise. It wasn't spectacle. This was something else. Quiet, like prayer. Heavy, like memory. One man took a knee and laid his medal at my feet. Another removed his cap and pressed it to his chest. A woman gave me a hug so gentle I barely felt her arms. Some called me document, some called me corpseman. One man, young, still active from the look of his posture, called me sir. I flinched a little at that. I was never an officer, but I didn't correct him, because I knew what he meant. There were no speeches, no microphones, just words spoken low and honest. I served with a corpseman once, saved my buddy's life, didn't get his name. My father never came home. I wish he had someone like you with him. You make us proud. I wanted to disappear into the sidewalk, but I couldn't move. My hands were locked around the folded flag I'd brought, tighter than I'd meant to hold it. My eyes kept falling to the photograph in my lap, black and white, corners frayed, faces half faded by time. That was my family, in a way. My brothers, the ones who never came back. Ryan knelt beside me after a while. He didn't speak either, just looked at the crowd, then at me, then back again. His face was flushed, not from the heat, but something deeper. I'd seen that look before on young men in field hospitals. The look of understanding too big for their age. They didn't know, he said quietly. I nodded. It's not their fault. No, but now they do. That was the thing. Recognition doesn't erase silence, but it breaks it. For years, I'd walked through Pine Hollow unnoticed. I was fine with that, or thought I was. I didn't need gratitude. I didn't want pity. But I see now, I think I needed this. Not for the medals, or the names, or the history. Just for the weight of being seen. For someone to say, you were there, and it mattered. I looked down at my hands, at the spots, at the way they trembled, at the skin stretched thin over old bones that had carried too many out of the fire. Burke stepped back toward me. I didn't come to the parade, he said. I was just passing through, visiting my grandmother. I wasn't even supposed to be on this street. I looked up at him. He shook his head slowly, but I saw the ink. I knew. I reached out and gripped his arm, gently, like an anchor. You did good, I said. My voice cracked a little, but I didn't care. He smiled. So did you. The crowd had quieted now, but no one was leaving. And then the band, still frozen in the middle of Main Street, began to play again. Not marching tunes, not Sousa, something softer. A hymn, maybe. I didn't recognize it, but it carried. One of the veterans came forward with a chair of his own, a newer one. Had it. He placed it next to mine and helped me stand, then settle into the better seat. Someone brought a bottle of water. Someone else wiped the sweat from my brow with a handkerchief that smelled faintly of lavender. I didn't know what to say to any of them, so I said nothing. That felt right. Sometimes silence is the most honest sound we have. The parade resumed after a while, but it moved differently now. Slower, more deliberate. Like every step was a nod toward something bigger than bunting or barbecue. Some of the floats turned their signs to face me. Some of the kids waved with solemnity, not just excitement. And every veteran who passed, no matter their age, their branch, their uniform, stopped. One by one. Each paused in front of me, saluted, and spoke the words that still echo in my chest. Welcome home, corpseman. The town quieted after dark. After the parade faded into laughter and barbecue smoke, after the last fire truck rolled down Main Street and the folding chairs were stacked back into trucks, Pine Hollow returned to its usual hush. Familiar, ordinary. I didn't go back with Ryan right away. I asked him to leave me at the grain mill hill, where I always watched the fireworks. He hesitated, said he didn't like the idea of me staying up there alone. I smiled, told him, that's the point. He didn't argue, just nodded and said he'd come get me when the sky went black. I don't think he believed me when I told him not to come. I walked the rest of the way myself, slow, every step a reminder of how the body fails before the soul is ready. The grass on the hillside was dry and sharp against my palms as I lowered myself down. The heat of the day had slipped out of the dirt, replaced by a breeze that moved like breath over water. I looked out across the rooftops. The town glowed in patches, porch lights and street lamps, flickering bug zappers and leftover strings of parade flags hanging limp in the stillness. In my lap, I placed the photo again. The same one from the parade, taken with a field camera 1 week before Incheon. 18 men, most of them boys. Mud on their boots. Smiles stretched across faces that wouldn't live to wrinkle. I remembered each name. I always had. I never spoke them aloud, but they stayed with me. In the way I tied my boots, in the way I folded a flag, in the way I left my porch light on even when I wasn't expecting company. Behind me, the first firework cracked the sky. It startled me more than it should have. I looked up. Colors bloomed above the courthouse dome. Red, blue, white, gold. And I thought of the colors we never saw in war. Just smoke, just blood, just ash. But this was beauty made from sound and flame. Controlled chaos, celebration. And I watched it from the place I always had. Only this time, I wasn't invisible. People in town would talk about what happened on Main Street. Maybe not forever, but long enough for a boy like Ryan to grow up with a clearer sense of what quiet service looks like. Long enough for the man who sells propane at the feed store to nod a little deeper when he sees another veteran pass by. Long enough for a kid to point at an old tattoo and ask, "What's that mean?" and for someone to answer. The sky lit again, this time with a dozen bursts at once. I reached for my chest, not in pain, just a habit. And there it was, that same weight, not of regret, not of sorrow, of something gentler, a fullness. I closed my eyes, let the sound wash over me, let the night hold me. And when it ended, when the last echo faded and the sky dimmed again, I felt no need to move. I leaned back in the grass, the photograph against my chest, the folded flag beneath my hand, and I breathed in once, deep and sure, then let it go. I don't know how long I slept, but when the sun rose 2 days later and Ryan knocked on my door and got no answer, he came up to the hill, found me there, still, quiet. He didn't panic, didn't cry. He just sat beside me for a long while, watching the town wake below. Eventually, he called someone, told them to bring the good flag, told them where to find the photograph. The VA sent a man, the town sent a minister, the mayor sent flowers. But it was the veterans who built the memorial. They chose the hill, of course. They called it Cain Ridge. They bolted a steel bench into the earth just a few feet from where I'd always sat. Not too fancy, just strong. On it, they engraved one line. He served in silence. We remember in light. They said I never asked for thanks. They were right. Gratitude was never the reason. Not when I enlisted. Not when I pulled men out of fire. Not when I came home through the side door of a country that never quite figured out how to welcome people like me back in. We were trained to do the job and keep moving. No speeches. No fuss. Just make sure the next man lives. That was the code. But deep down, beneath the old bones, behind the quiet, I think every one of us who came back with breath in our lungs wanted something. Not a parade, not a medal, just to know it mattered, just to know someone saw us. That's what that day gave me. Recognition didn't come loud. It came soft, slow, through a whisper on a street I'd walked for 50 years without being noticed, through a hand on my shoulder, through the silence of strangers standing still with their heads bowed. It's strange how quickly a moment can unearth a life. The years I spent fixing engines, drinking black coffee alone, watching dusk fall from my porch, I thought those years were my ending. I thought I'd already had my moments, that everything worth remembering had happened long ago. But turns out, memory can be passed forward, not just back. That boy, Elias Burke, he carried his grandfather's story like a thread through time. And when he saw the tattoo, it pulled. It brought everything forward. Not for attention, not for glory, just for truth. Because sometimes the truth needs to be seen out loud. They called me a hero. That's not a word I wear well. I was just a corpseman. Just a kid with a bag of morphine and shaking hands. Just someone who didn't run when others fell. But if that makes me something more than forgotten, then I'll take it. Not for myself, but for the men who didn't come home. They deserved this more than I ever did. That night, before I slept, I sat with the photograph on my chest. 18 faces, some blurry with time, some burned into memory. I said their names one last time in my head, not in order, not like a list, just as they came, face, voice, a joke whispered in a trench, a letter read under flashlight, a song hummed during a lull. Then I folded the flag tighter under my arm and let myself go. There's peace in knowing the world didn't forget that even after decades of silence, there are still people who stop when they see ink faded into skin. People who know what a trident wrapped in an eagle's claw means. People who say, brother, and mean it like a vow. And there's peace in knowing the town changed, not with grand declarations, but with small shifts. A bench on a hill, a plaque with my name, a boy like Ryan standing taller when someone says, veteran. That's the real legacy. Not buildings or ceremonies, but changed eyes, changed hearts. And maybe, if one more forgotten soul is seen because of what happened that day, then it was all worth it. Every long year, every silent morning, every memory carried alone. Because now, I don't carry them alone. They carry me. Sometimes, it takes a single word to change the shape of a life. Not a speech, not a headline, just a word whispered on a hot morning in July. Brother, I lived long enough to see what silence can become when someone dares to interrupt it. A town paused, a generation listened, a hill was named, and for once, the forgotten were not. I died with my hands folded over a photograph and a flag, but I didn't die unseen. I was remembered, and that is more than I ever asked, more than I thought possible, and enough.